Welcome to another episode of Reclaiming Timeless Ways. Mike Traster, Simon Fuller. Glad you're along for yet another ride, another wild one with two yokels.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we get ready for today's show, it's going to be talking about herbal medicine. We just do want to open up by saying neither of us are in any way, shape, or form associated with the medical profession. This is not, we do not encourage you to do anything without consulting the proper people in your world. But these are just some tips, information, knowledge that you've gained, Mike. We are not a substitute by any stretch of the imagination for medical care.
Right. Yeah, I was a nurse a long time ago.
Yeah, you've got some training. I've got none. Don't listen to me at all.
Don't listen to me either. There's always more to know, a lot more.
But there is good information out there, Mike. I mean, you shared with me a book that's got a lot of information, and that's what it is. This show started and still is about community and making a better community, which isn't just about me saying, "Hi, Mike, how you doing?" and having a conversation. There's a lot of little things, and it's sharing knowledge, and that's a component of the show, and that's what you want to do today is share knowledge, and who knows how this may impact somebody out there, Mike.
It might help you when you're lacking other tools.
Yeah.
Right? I remember as a kid somebody saying that they would treat a cold with chicken soup, and I thought they were crazy. But it turns out there's some validity to it, Doesn't cure it, but it shortens it.
Right.
Sometimes, or with garlic and onion, And I was like, no, you're crazy. Well, it turns out it's helpful,
Yeah.
So what I did was I wrote myself a brief cheat sheet, and I've spent, let's say a couple thousand hours over many years of study. And I'm sure I've forgotten 3/4 of what I learned for lack of application,
Right.
You have to stay steady with whatever. Like even my nursing knowledge, years after I took my boards and then retired, I was still able to pass a board on the internet, but I no longer could.
Yeah.
So I've lost a bunch. What you don't stay current with, you lose, even if you lose it at the rate of 1 or 2% a year, by the time 5 or 6 years goes by, you've lost,
A lot.
oh my goodness, have you ever? And you're like, there's a blank space in my head. Didn't I used to have that filled up with something useful?
Right.
And you're looking and you can't find it. It's dim because it hasn't been used. So what I did is I wrote a little alphabetical cheat sheet, okay? And I'll mention these herbs, and then you can study about them and find out what you always want to say, what's it for?
Right.
How much? Are there any contraindications or times when you shouldn't use it? How much is enough? How much is too much? So I'm not going to tell you those things. You have to study that on your own.
Right.
Okay? So you're not going to say Mike said, because I didn't, and I won't. So the first one.
So you're telling me you're not a pharmacist?
I'm not a pharmacist.
No. This is just good information that you've learned.
I like this.
Yeah.
My first book, there was a bookstore, a gift store on Big Sur, California. It was like 1975. A store called Nepenthe. Beautiful, gorgeous. And they had this book called Herbs and Things, written by Jeannie Rose. It was kind of an old hippie-style book. Very interesting, a lot of interesting, folksy drawings in it. It was very basic, but it got a fire it started in me. I didn't even realize it was going to get me interested in this. Next thing I know, I had another book and another. So the first, just going to go through the alphabet. There's a Chinese herb called astragalus, astragalus. It's an immune-stimulating herb, and it's good to work with viruses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it always going to help you? No. I use it regularly, and I haven't been sick from this nonsense we've all been going through for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
The second herb, and I think the Chinese hold astragalus in particularly high esteem. They value it greatly. Now, I remember I was in my car once and it overheated, and I opened up the radiator cap and got a bunch of hot water on my chest, and I was beet red. I was parked in front of this woman's house, and she comes running out with this little jar. She hands it to me, and my chest was just like a beet. And she goes, and it hurt. She goes, "Put this on your skin." So what is it? She goes, "It's aloe. It will help." It did. And within the hour, the red was gone, and there was no pain. I mean, we just it wasn't a huge burn, but it was painful. So it helped me. So that would be the A's. The other one would be anise, and anise is good. It's a cooking herb. It's good for like gas in the stomach, to reduce gas. Borage, B-O-R-A-G-E. Borage is a little plant that's found in gardens, and it contains a substance called GLA, G like go, gamma-linoleic acid. And GLA is used, or gamma-linoleic acid is used for, in some cases, can be somewhat helpful to help treat multiple sclerosis. Now, it's not a substitute for medicine.
Yeah.
But GLA seems to help protect the myelin sheath, which is the insulatory sheath around the nerves. They say that it gives it some protection and some stability. So borage. Bilberry is an herb that was found in the Pacific Islands in the Second World War, and the natives were giving it to American pilots who were having trouble landing their plane safely at night, and it improved their night vision. So that's another one. Blueberries are wonderful for connective tissue and for memory. So I would just say any dark berry that's edible, right? Not go out in the woods and say, "Oh, it's dark, I'm going to eat it." Oops, he was a good guy. But, things you can clearly recognize or buy. The dark berries are good for vision and brain function and connective tissue. Bladderwrack is a seaweed, and it's good for
I'm going to get you a blueberry.
for thyroid function. Thank you. Comfrey. Comfrey is good for healing tissue damage, right? Now, there's some question about whether or not it's safe to be used internally. A lot of people say it is not, that it has a compound in it that can harm the liver. So I've stayed away from it for internal use, period. There's a big argument going on. Some people say the root is unsafe, but the leaves are safe. Some people say that the younger the plant, the more of this compound it has in it called pyrrolizing alkaloid. That's the technical name of this thing that can cause a dysfunction of the liver that's called veno-occlusive disease, right? Which means that the veins actually get blocked up. So it can be very serious. So my tendency is to err on the side of caution,
Yeah.
right? So if you have an injury, soft tissue injury, let's say I have a bad strain in my arm, so I make a poultice, which is you grind up some leaves, boil them or heat them up, and take the rag soaked in that water, you put it over the ear. It's supposed to help heal that faster. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence saying that actually does work. But internal, I would not use it.
Yeah.
Now, some people think I'm too cautious. Cilantro is an herb that helps to clear heavy metals out of the body. Okay, so it's called a chelator, and chelation it actually is derived from the Greek word chyle, which means claw. So they say that as a metaphor that it grabs the metal and removes it from like the inside of the body. So cilantro is good to remove like mercury or lead. Garlic is another chelating herb. Cinnamon is good to help regulate blood sugar. Celery seed is good to just dump extra fluids, Like if he got too many, clove is useful for dental, like toothache. It's actually, it can give you some pain control. I've used it and it worked. Dandelion is also a liver tonic. The root is a liver tonic. The leaf is a diuretic, and the whole plant is edible. Echinacea stimulates immune function, and it has a compound in it, one word, mucopolysaccharide.
You say you lost him in this whole nursing thing. Doesn't sound like you lost much of it. You're saying a lot of words, and I'm like, what's going on?
I know.
And he doesn't have most of it written down.
That's
He
not
just
written-
has
no,
he just
no.
has the names.
Just the name.
And I'm like, where's this? Where are you pulling all this from? Anyway,
I know.
sorry, Mike.
So echinacea has a mucopolysaccharide in it. What it does is it tricks the immune system into thinking that it's an infectious organism. So the immune system starts pumping out all these immune factors. And it works for about 8 days. And after about the 8th day, the immune system goes, wait a minute, you've been funning me,
Yeah.
and it shuts down. So you can use it for about 8 days at a time. Then you have to cycle and use something else. Evening primrose is a small decorative plant, and like borage, it contains gamma-linoleic acid. So it's also used to treat multiple sclerosis. Some people get some benefit from it. It's not a substitute for medicine.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that just to protect my butt. It isn't.
Yeah.
You know, but it can be useful. Elderberry is helpful for treating and preventing some viral infections, but it also can raise an inflammatory prostaglandin called a cytokine. No, it's not written there either. I know. This is after 32 years of not doing it. But so if you're sick and you take elderberry, if it starts making you worse, stop taking the elderberry, because the cytokine will cause more inflammation. It can make lung inflammation worse. So they say that, like people with, a severe virus, respiratory virus, be very careful with that. Feverfew is a wonderful herb, and it's used to treat migraine headaches. And it has a substance in it that helps to suppress, another word, a substance called leukotriene, which is an inflammatory prostaglandin. So when you get a migraine headache, the arteries in your head expand, right? They dilate or expand. When they do that because they have in the middle layer called the media, I think, there's a muscular layer in the artery. It's not in the vein, but it is in the artery. So when you have an inflammatory process, the artery expands and there's a nerve around the artery. So the reason why people say I can feel my pulse in my head when they have a migraine is that it's expanding against the nerve. So the herb will actually help to shrink that. The feverfew will help to shrink it, and then you don't feel that pressure and your symptoms go down. Coffee can be helpful, but some people will treat it with coffee and they'll take a bunch of coffee and the symptoms will go away, but when the caffeine's back out of their bottom, because the caffeine will
Shrink, yeah.
right, it will cause vasoconstriction, right, which is why your blood pressure goes up.
Right.
But the problem is as the caffeine level goes down, if the inflammatory compound that's causing it is still in your body, then you're going to rebound to another migraine. So if you use it more gently, then you tend to get less of that rebound effect. So that would be another one. Ginger is good for microcirculation. It's in tiny blood vessels, right? They become the blood carrying cells become more flexible, so you get better circulation, and it's good to treat nausea and seasickness and dizziness. And I've tested it. It was after I got hurt, I used it, and it helped me. And I had used some meclizine, which of course slows you down. It's like it's a drug, and it slowed me down. So I took the meclizine, I threw it in the toilet, and I used the ginger. I got the same or better benefit without being sedated. Garlic, antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, and it helps to lessen blood clots. So it's more protective in that way. So I've got a huge list here, but I'm just going to read a few more.
Sure.
Okay. Licorice is good for healing stomach ulcers. Okay. But it has a compound in it which can raise blood pressure. The reason why it raises blood pressure is because it has a compound in it called glyceric acid. I haven't read this in a long time. And so some licorice is produced that doesn't have the glyceric acid, and it's called DGL, deglycerized licorice. So if you get the licorice without the glyceric acid, it won't have that effect, so you'll get the benefit without the downside, right? So that's lavender is used as a sleep aid, and most people just use it like put it on their pillow, or they might take a tiny drop of it, maybe put it on their forehead. I'm not sure about the safety of that, but it tends to be sedating, right? Milk thistle is one of the most extraordinary herbs, and it actually can restore liver function where there's been damage, rather remarkably. And it's even been used to treat dangerous mushroom poisoning, which is fatal.
Right.
And most of the time, like Amanita mushroom poisoning. It's also called, I think, the death cap. So it's a remarkable herb. There was a case in Britain where I think 18 or 19 people went out and they were picking mushrooms because they thought they knew what they were doing, and they didn't. And they all got poisoned, and they were either going to need a liver transplant or die. And I think all but one was treated with this and recovered. So it was incredible herb. The list goes on, but I think that's a good start,
Yeah.
you know?
And Mike, ultimately, I think the point is, and even your list, which is a pretty good size,
Right.
is still just a sample size of what's
Oh.
out there.
This is tiny.
Right. And so when you really look at it, we could do, 25 shows on this very topic. Point is, you spent some time looking at it. You find a lot of value in the information that Mother Nature provides us. And you've suggested, again, in other shows, a couple books. If this interests you, and maybe some of you are watching saying, not for me, and that's okay.
Right.
Agree to disagree on that, but there are some great resources out there, Mike, that have helped you understand better how these can help, and that you've seen firsthand benefits of.
Absolutely. I'm going to mention just a couple more. One is called Old Man's Beard. Sometimes
Talking about me?
Yeah, me. You got a young guy. So it's also called Usnea, U-S-N-E-A. And so it looks like, you ever go into like an old garage or a basement, and there's like old cloth that's just been eaten away, like
Sure.
from moths.
Sure.
So it's like
All tattered and
yeah, it's just
beat up.
right. So there's these plants that are hanging off like the limbs of old pine trees that look like that. And they're kind of white and stringy and greenish, and they're a little bit stretchy, right? That's Usnea. And so you can read about it and find out more about safe recognition, right? I'm not saying I've given you enough information to recognize it carefully. I haven't. I think it's also called a lichen, right? But it has some excellent antibiotic properties, right? So it's really important, especially in a world where who knows if you're going to have the things you need.
Right.
It's something is better than nothing.
Right.
Right. So that would be one. Valerian is just a good sedative, right? I've never found any in the wild. I guess it's not that hard to find. If you're a forager, I'm not much of a forager, so it's not one of my strengths. The hip, if you look at a rose, right? So it's sitting there like this, and at the bottom there's like a ball underneath the rose.
Yeah.
That's called the hip. It's full of vitamin C.
Huh.
Okay, and the seeds are in there. So they say if you scrape the seeds out because they're bitter, and you just take what's left in the rose hip and you soak it, you can get some vitamin C in nature. So that would be another one. The inside of the willow bark, the bark of the willow, there's a substance called acetyl salicylic acid, which is what they use to synthesize aspirin. So
Interesting.
yeah, that's just a few. Parsley, good diuretic.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a garnishing on
Yeah,
at a meal.
yeah, yeah. It's a good diuretic, very good one. So I think that's enough herbs for one day.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. We do appreciate you sharing it. I do think there's a lot of value in that, and hopefully you find that as well, and get you some relief or some help, and sometimes even save you some bucks, Mike. If nothing else, you've got a few more tools in the old mindset.
Yeah, I would say start with 10 or 20 herbs.
Yeah,
You know,
that makes sense to you and maybe what you're dealing with.
right.
Look it up, do some research. It'll be worth your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today as well, as we conclude yet another episode of Reclaiming Timeless Ways. Have a wonderful day.